Good morning, everybody. It's really great to see a lot of familiar faces, some new faces. For those that don't know me, my name is Kil Klotska, Peter Lanton, and I'm the elected president of the Haida Nation. It's my honor to welcome you all to Haida Gwaii and to the Kai Center. I know a lot of you have probably heard a lot about some of our major features on Haida Gwaii. The Kai Center is one of our shining stars, and I think it's appropriate that we're doing it here. And I think it's very important for me in my introduction to talk about how important it is that we are having this gathering in Haida Gwaii. We've contemplated, the need for wanting to do this after the Simushir incident. And we did battle about, trying to get all the authorities together, all the appropriate people in one room. And we fought very hard to ensure that it does happen on the island. Because I think if you look back at the incident, in that context, we were fighting for an incident command center to be set up here on Haida Gwaii in the event that, the near miss occurred. But I think you're in Haida Gwaii, you're in Haida territory, and the land of Haida Gwaii. And as you can see, beautiful weather, pristine environment. This is our home, and we welcome you to our home. But I think what's probably most fitting for my introduction is, we're all here, we're all gathered for a common purpose. But I really want to keep in front of everybody, in front of, of how you feel over the next 2 days, that, the situation that we had in October is the same situation we have today. If there was an incident to happen off the coast of Haida Gwaii today, we would probably be in no better place than we were in October. So that's not to shed a negative light on anything we're doing. I think I'm just trying to keep it in front of everybody that we still have a lot of work to do. So what I really hope you keep in front of you and in your minds and in your hearts while you're here is to keep in mind what Haida Gwaii represents, as we move forward in this conversation. Because Haida Gwaii is the land of protected area. Over 52% of this island is protected. The people that live here have an inherent belief that we have to protect this island, whatever means necessary. That's what you're going to feel when you talk to people from here, whether they're First Nations, Haida, or just islanders. We all have this common understanding and respect for these islands. And it's that legacy. It's entrenched in everything that we do around these islands, is to protect it. It's not even, nobody contemplates this role or this duty. When you live here and you come from here, that's your job, that's your role. So the expectations of everybody on this island is entrenched in that. That this isn't about, it is about rights and title, it is about, responsible parties, it's about all those things. But the people that live here have this inherent belief that they have to do something if this island is threatened. You've seen it politically with Enbridge and other things. It goes back to Lyle Island. It continues today. The threats are different today. It's not necessarily about clear-cut logging, but this notion of increased tanker traffic around Haida territory is looming. And it is something that concerns islanders all over Haida Gwaii. So keep in mind that our sense of what our duty and responsibility is not something that people contemplate. It's inherent in you when you're from here. And we need to answer that question going forward. And I think, the fact that we're here on Haida Gwaii, that's what I really hope you keep focused here, is that this is our island. This is our home. This is our backyard. So when we contemplate what's going to be our roles and responsibilities in the event for the next potential threat to our island, I really hope you keep that local focus in mind about how the local people feel. Because I think that's what we're here to do, is to find out where we fit into this bigger picture. But in conclusion, I just want to welcome you all again and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come to Haida Gwaii. And I think just being here, getting a sense of our island and who we are, will give you a little bit more appreciation for what role we should be playing, and really trying to keep in focus that we're not there yet. There's a lot of work to do, and if there was to be another issue off the islands again, like tomorrow, we still wouldn't be in a position that we want to be in, to protect these islands. But I'm looking forward to the next 2 days. We're going to open up with a panel that really reflects on the Simushir incident. But I think moving forward, we're here committed to work with everybody, all the authorities, on ensuring that we are ready. Because the conversation has shifted from a contemplated discussion around increased tanker traffic to a realization that there are threats today, and we need to get ready today regardless of any contemplated increase in traffic. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Russ, and once again, hope you enjoy your time in Haida Gwaii, and I look forward to having conversations over the next 2 days. So welcome.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Russ. Again, my name is Philip Murdoch. I'm with the Canadian Coast Guard. My day job is the Superintendent of Environmental Response for Western Region. Before I begin, a couple of notes. First of all, I want to thank the Haida Nation for hosting this and for welcoming certainly the Coast Guard members that are here, as well as the rest of us, welcoming us to the Haida territory. So thank you so much. I also want to pass along or not mine, but Roger Gerard, the Assistant Commissioner of the Canadian Coast Guard, unfortunately was to have been here, but due to events that are occurring in the Lower Mainland, he unfortunately had to cancel his trip. He was prepared to come. I know he's very disappointed, and I know he would be here if he could. So again, apologies to everyone. So those are sort of just a couple of little quick opening things. I think I want to sort of start by talking about a little bit about the Coast Guard role. The Canadian Coast Guard is a special operating agency that works under the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. In terms of marine activities, we are the Government of Canada's operational marine arm. That is to say, we deal with things on the water. And I say that because I think it's important to differentiate between Transport Canada's role, which is a regulating role, a regulator, and again, the Canadian Coast Guard is more operational. Within the Canadian Coast Guard, we have basically four primary programs. They would be Marine Communications and Traffic Services, MCTS, Search and Rescue, SAR, A2N, Aids to Navigation, and then the last one is the group that I lead, is the Environmental Response Group. In sort of putting things in context, the Coast Guard believes, or we feel, we have several things that lead to a safe marine system in Canada. So the first thing we have is the aids to navigation, and those would be the lighthouses, the floating aids, the buoys that we see out around the coast. And these are there to help mariners obviously stay off the rocks, help them navigate. So that's a service we provide. Marine Communication and Traffic Services. It's the communication with the shore stations, vessel traffic monitoring as vessels transit through specific areas along the coast and around the coast. Again, this is a prevention measure. We monitor what the activities of vessels, and we, at certain areas they have to report in, and we keep track of those activities. The Search and Rescue Group is, again, exactly as it sounds. It's with respect to if there is a casualty, if there is an incident, they are the responders who provide that search and rescue capability and go and primarily focused on the saving of life. And then there's environmental response. And we're the group that, if the worst case happens, if you have a marine incident and it becomes a casualty, the environmental response group is responsible in terms of the cleanup of any oil on the spill, or on the water, any marine pollution. And under the Canada Shipping Act, the Environmental Response Group, through the Oceans Act and the Canada Shipping Act, have very specific delegated authorities that we can use to ensure that an adequate or appropriate response to any marine spill is undertaken. So, and that even includes whether there's a threat of marine spill or an actual marine spill. It's interesting to note that in the case of the Simushir, this was never an environmental response incident. It never transitioned from a search and rescue. It was a search and rescue incident from the time it started until the time it ended. But in the context of the seriousness of the consequence had the vessel drifted ashore, the Canadian Coast Guard, through this very strong leadership, I would say, of Roger Gerard, our Assistant Commissioner, we leaned very far forward. We said, this is serious, we need to get people to Haida Gwaii, start planning and preparing for that worst case scenario. We decided that we need to, again, get people to Haida Gwaii, set up a command post, which is what the people that you see here in front of you, we were the somewhat, I don't want to say reluctant leaders, but unsure leaders, I would say, at that point, because we weren't sure where the incident was going and what was going to, how it was going to transpire. From my perspective, I guess, at the time my office was located at the airport at YVR in Vancouver. We have a search and rescue base there where everyone knows, or most people know, about the air cushion vehicles that the Coast Guard operates. We operate 2 at Sea Island or out of Sea Island. And at the same location, Environmental Response has a depot of equipment and a small staff of response experts. And the superintendent's job was located there. And so early on that morning, around 6:30 or so, I was actually on my way to work when my phone rang, and of course, I couldn't answer it because I was driving. But I knew something was up because I could see the call was from our environmental response duty officer. We have a duty officer who's available 24/7, 365, who would get the initial call whenever there's a situation developing. And as the situation was developing, because there was a potential for the vessel casualty, which again remained a search and rescue, or was a search and rescue at that point in time, they gave us a heads up that there could be a potential environmental response situation. After learning of the situation in terms of the Simushir being off the coast and broken down and drifting towards the coast, we immediately began to take actions to, again, lean forward, prepare for the worst case scenario. And in terms of what we did, I deployed some of my staff from Sea Island to Victoria, where we had the Coast Guard ship Bartlett. The Bartlett had been out on a NAVAIDS tender program. It was recalled to Victoria Base very quickly that morning around 8 a.m. And we were preparing our offshore ER equipment, environmental response equipment, to be loaded on board the vessel. So we deployed one person from Vancouver over to Victoria, where again we had a depot of equipment and staff there, and we prepared for that loading of equipment at Victoria. At the same time, I sent another employee up to our main arrangements to have them, 2 of them sent up to Prince Rupert. Prince Rupert, again, we have another large depot that is a staffed depot. We have people there, and again, leaning forward, preparing for the worst case, and again, we were getting equipment ready, our offshore deep water capable equipment ready to deploy aboard a Coast Guard vessel. The Bartlett, as I say, was close to Victoria. It was tasked with the incident, returned to Victoria. The Wilfrid Laurier, the largest ship in the region, was returning from the Arctic voyage. She was midway down the west coast of Vancouver Island. She was turned around and sent back up towards Haida Gwaii, and the intent would have been, if required, she would have come into Rupert to load the equipment that we were prepping there. Again, in those sort of early morning hours, called Western Canada Marine Response to give them a heads up. They're an important partner of the Canadian Coast Guard. In terms of oil spill response, they are the Transport Canada Certified Response Organization for Western Canada. And so I wanted to give them notification that this was occurring and that they, in fact, might be asked to participate. And in fact, we ended up having them participate through I guess by way of the way the events unfolded during that day. So while I'm sitting in my office in Vancouver, looking out on the Fraser River at the airport, a number of things obviously come to mind. So when you get over that initial, oh my God, I hope this doesn't happen, and then you get down to work. And there were a number of things that sort of I was responsible for to get rolling. And as I say, the first thing was getting my people ready in terms of any equipment that needed to be deployed. It's important to remember that the Coast Guard is sort of the second, the backup, we're not the primary responders, so to speak. That job through the regime in Canada is left to in our case, Western Canada Marine Response Organization. They're the TC Certified Response Organization on the West Coast, as I said. And so as we move forward, one of the first things I wanted to know was, did the vessel have an arrangement with the response organization? And so in this case, the vessel, because it was not calling on a Canadian port, had no intention of calling on a Canadian port, There's no requirement for it to have an arrangement with the Canadian Response Organization. It did have an arrangement with the American Response Organization, but not with the Canadian one. And so this was the first sort of challenge, if you will, that had to be dealt with from my perspective, was either ensuring that they were going to obtain an arrangement, or under the powers that the Canadian Coast Guard has, we would have to direct the response organization to respond, because there was no arrangement. Through lawyers and translation, this took longer than it probably should have, but that's the process. But we were able to successfully have the ship owners sign an arrangement with Western Canada Marine around, and I have to go back and check, 1830, that first night. So that was helpful, because that's one piece, one element of the puzzle that was important to have in place. And again, we were fortunate. It was, in all honesty, it was getting very close to the point where as the superintendent, I was ready to say, no, we can't wait any longer, I'm going to be directing. But it is much better for everyone if there is an arrangement in place. And so we were able to make that happen, albeit in a longer period of time than I would have liked. At the same...
Everyone here okay?
You can't hear me, we're all I'm the deaf.
We're going to have the questions after each speaker.
Okay.
Okay. And so that was one element of the puzzle that sort of needed to be solved. The other element that's, I think, noteworthy is the issue of the Barbara Foss, the tug of opportunity that was dispatched. At the same time as we were concerned about the arrangements in terms of the oil spill response from Western Canada Marine, we also knew that we needed to get a tug to the vessel as quickly as possible, a commercial assist tug, so to speak. And again, it seemed to be taking a long time, longer than I think any of us, certainly at the time, and most people in this room, sort of hindcasting, looking back, would say, man, that took a long time. Again, fortunately, we were able to, or fortunately the ship owner agreed to contract directly with the Foss company and avail themselves of the use of that tug. There were some glitches, and I can't speak to those because I wasn't on board the tug, but the tug did eventually get underway and make its way to the casualty area, and did in fact arrive and provide assistance. Perhaps not as timely as we would have liked, but it did in fact occur. I mention it specifically again because under the Canada Shipping Act, the Canadian Coast Guard has that authority. At any time, we could have directed any vessel to assist with this mission. And I can tell you that that was in our back pockets, ready to be used if required. But again, we knew arrangements were being made by the ship owners, and so we allowed that to proceed as quickly as it could. I'm not even at the command thing yet, am I? Thanks, Phil. So later in the day, around 5 p.m., 4 p.m., we had talked about getting up to Hawaii, setting up a command post, and we made that decision later in the day. I think we had talked about it throughout the day, and it was later in the day we said, even though things were looking better at that point, we said, no, we should go to Hawaii. We should go through the effort of setting up a command post, and just to be safe, and I think as well also to have that opportunity to try and to begin to build some relationships with people of the Haida Nation and of Haida. So I think it was a benefit for many reasons to come up. We arrived on the afternoon flight Saturday afternoon, and it was actually much like yesterday's flight coming in. It was a relatively nice day. It wasn't terrible. It was overcast, but sort of sun breaking through now and then. And I just have to say, and I had the same feeling yesterday. You sort of swing in, you come down, the wheels come down, and all you see is water. And you're thinking, is there a runway here? And you're getting lower and lower and lower, and then you see some sand, and you go, is there a runway here? But it's fine. We arrived and we immediately proceeded to the BC Ministry of Forestry offices. And those folks had very kindly donated their facility with a large boardroom to begin the process of setting up a command post. And it was there where I first met Peter and your staff. Norm Fellows came in from Smithers, I guess. And we began the process of discussing what our next step would be. So I'll talk briefly, I guess, about my view of the incident command. We never really got there. I think we tried to use it as a bit of a learning opportunity. And again, time back, I think we might have been a little more rigorous in terms of that learning opportunity. What we've been faced with, I think, and we've seen this in several incidents in the last couple of years, is that it's incumbent upon the Coast Guard and its partners, I think, to do a much better job of educating local municipalities, First Nations, the nations that we deal with, so that they have a better understanding. This isn't a criticism, this is a reality. We all have a better understanding of how that incident command system works and how it's going to work as we move forward in any given incident situation. And the Coast Guard is we're very culpable here. We are just moving into the incident command structure. We are neophytes. We used it for the somewhat well-known Zelensky operation in 2013. That was our first real taste of incident command. And I think it was an eye-opener for many people in the Canadian Coast Guard of the amount of resources, the amount of people you need to fully staff up a command post and the drain it can have on any organization. And again, so coming to the Simushir in October, I would say we were not, notwithstanding that the critical danger I think had passed by the time we arrived here, we still probably were not prepared as well as we could have been to come up and set up a command post. We did set up a command post, however, and again, I think it was more of an educational opportunity for the participants of the command post in terms of roles and responsibilities, expectations perhaps, and where we're going. I'm going to get the hook. It's great. So I'll pass the baton. How does that sound?
So I think we do have just a couple questions. It's mainly just to clarify that we all have a similar understanding of the event, and we still have three presenters, so from the province, from the Haida Nation, and also from the responsible party. So I had a question up at the top there.
Yeah, Chad Bochop, Makah Tribe, and you actually answered my question. I was curious if you had the authority to require the vessel to receive assistance or receive a tow line. And to me, that's vitally important in understanding the incident.
In any situation, in the Canadian model, in any situation where there's a threat of pollution, the Canadian Coast Guard can act and can direct vessels, has a number of things it can do under Canadian law to ensure, to avoid, hopefully, that casualty or that pollution from being released.
Just clarification around WCMRC being called out. At 8:30 in the morning, we started to mobilize even though we didn't have a contract. So we had equipment, personnel, everything organized, ready to go when we did so.
Any other quick questions?
Yeah.
Mark?
So when you have the authority to direct the town to assist or doesn't take it, so there's to prevent risk of pollution, is there a mechanism to pay for that if the potential responsible party doesn't give out financial resources?
Yes, there is a mechanism to pay. In this case, the Canadian Coast Guard, would be required to pay reasonable costs, and then we would go forward seeking compensation from the owners, and then if the owners don't have money, there's several avenues we can go down through to seek refunds.
Good, thanks, Phil. So we will be having kind of general discussion with the panel, after the presentations. So I'll move on to Norm Fallows. So Norm has spent some time here in Haida Gwaii. He came over and did an exercise as part of, Canada-US planning in terms of emergency response, looking at resources here in Hawaii. And when he came back in October, of course, it wasn't an exercise anymore. It was a potential incident. So Norm.
Good day, everybody. I want to thank the Hydro very much for inviting us to be here on your traditional land. It was an interesting, this was an interesting one. My name is Norm Fellows. I'm a Senior Response Officer for British Columbia Ministry of Environment. I'm housed out of Smithers, British Columbia. We are the lead provincial agency for hazardous material spills within the province of British Columbia. Any spill within the province that affects provincial assets or resources, we will be involved, regardless of the source, whether that's marine-based from a ship, or a pipeline, or a motor vehicle accident, or rail, mining. We have lots of instances. We have illegal dumping from clandestine labs. So we are a provincial lead agency, and we will be involved if there's a spill that affects provincial assets. With this particular one, we knew early on, we have a notification process with our federal counterparts where we receive spills, potential spills from them, and vice versa. If we have a spill that occurs within a province that might affect the marine environment, we will notify them, reciprocal agreement. With this particular one though, we were notified early in the morning, I believe around 6:30, we have a duty officer that is on 24/7, 365, received a notification, made some internal calls, and we knew right away that this is a potential incident that could have large consequences. As a result, the way we like to do our business is we like to appoint an incident commander right away if we think this is going to be an incident that's going to escalate. Identify that incident commander to others so other agencies know who that's going to be. We like to activate our emergency operations center in Victoria right away to start staffing up. And then if, in this particular case, it was a SAR event, as Philip mentioned, but there's still that potential impact of having a serious consequences on the west coast of Hawaii. So what we like to do is to set up that, or get that incident commander rolling, and then establish an incident command post. What we've seen over the years is you need to ramp up early, and you need to have a place where people can go. Trying to do things over the phone when there might be a potential large incident, I don't think that's the best way to go. You need to have a physical command post, and you need to send people there as quickly as you can. Early on in the incident in the morning, we had a what we call a resource agency call, 9 o'clock in the morning, and typically in the past that's always been shared by my Environment Canada and ourselves. We try to get together those folks that have resources at risk implications, whether that be First Nations or other stakeholders, provincial and federal agents, and start discussing what do we need to do. What sort of resources at risk might be potentially impacted, what shorelines, what are the resource values in those shorelines, whether it's cultural, or archaeological, or physical. We had that at 9 o'clock in the morning. That was just a couple hours out after the province being notified. We then, as I was appointed incident commander for the province, and my first priority was to determine where can we go and set up an incident command post. I contacted our counterparts here with the Ministry of Forestry, Lands, Natural Resource Operations, Leonard Munt, the district manager, and he was gracious enough to say, you know what, you can set up here. I did communicated that to Coast Guard that I think the best place for us to set up shop would be here in Hawaii. The province's preference is try to co-locate with the responsible party, with the federal agency, as close to the incident as possible, providing that logistics infrastructure is available. I was involved with the Queen of the North. With that particular incident back in 2006, we made the decision early on to go to Prince Rupert. The first command post was set up by BC Ferries at their location down by the BC Ferry terminals. Unfortunately, that location was not conducive for cellular activities, for infrastructure. We had to move again. We moved to the Ministry of Forestry building. I guess the message I'm trying to get across is you need to make sure you have a facility that is able to house people, and your location that you pick to be able to accommodate everybody and has the necessary logistics. but you want to be as close to the incident as possible. So with that first morning, the province was busy, and we knew right away that this might be a potential large incident. We need to get resources to the site. I started to mobilize our folks back at our Emergency Operations Center back in Victoria. We have what's called a Provincial Incident Management Team, which have technical specialists such as oil and wildlife specialists. We have air monitoring specialists, shoreline. There's a process out there called SCAT, which stands for Shoreline Cleanup Assessment Techniques. Those folks that are versed in walking shorelines, looking for impacts. Waste management specialists, we know that if it is a large incident, waste is actually a very critical aspect that can actually bring your incident to a standstill if you don't have the ability to remove the waste quickly. So our folks down in Victoria were very involved with trying to round up all of our folks, and we made arrangements to get them to Haida as quick as possible. As things progressed throughout that day, the folks in the Gordon Reed, which I do have to commend, did an amazing job of preventing this incident from getting to a bad situation where none of us wanted to be. Did an absolutely amazing job. Later on the day, when they finally got the line secured to the Simushir and started heading west, the incident was, the threat was decreasing. However, though, with our federal counterparts, we still knew that we should still get to Haida Gwaii. If nothing else, even though it was still an ongoing incident, we can use this as a training opportunity. One of the things I find challenging around the province, even though that the province, we've been using the incident command system, it's a command system that most jurisdictions around the world use now, is trying to get people educated about the incident command system, and particularly there's a concept here called unified command, and how people play together and make decisions collaboratively. And sometimes that's not always clear. Everybody has jurisdictional roles. First Nations have traditional lands that they're absolutely passionate about, that they want to protect. They play an absolute key role within that unified command structure. And agencies themselves, but understanding how we all play together, how we make decisions, and sometimes there's absolute difficult decisions that have to be made. And who gets to have that 51% of the pie? How does that process work? So coming over to Haida Gwaii was a real good opportunity to talk about, as Philip mentioned, our roles and responsibilities and how we play together. We did sort of, when we got the incident command post up and running, we did sort of a run through of, I remember some of the folks from the CHN asking, well, how do we play a role? Like, where would we be placed in this structure? And for the most part, a lot of us are going to be playing a part of unified command, but a lot of your expertise about the resources that could be potentially affected would be environmentally, and that's, we sort of did a walkthrough of how would this process work. I facilitated a little bit of that, and how we envisioned the process would work. I guess the message I want to get home, though, is if you think you have a resource that may be impacted, do not wait for somebody to call you. Find out where the incident command post is going to be and get yourself there. And somehow you'll be plugged into the system. But do not wait to be called. And one of the worst things, I don't like to hear this, we weren't called. Well, then if you weren't called, there's probably a lot of things that are happening and you can't notify everybody. I know one of the things we talked about in our debrief is how we can do a better job of notification, getting information out to others. But if you haven't been communicated, you have a particular role, and you think you have a particular role to play in an incident, find out where that command post is going to be and get yourself there, and somehow we'll plug you into the system. This was another, we've had a few close calls over the years. I think we're getting better at establishing our roles and responsibilities and how we play with one another, but we still have a long ways to go. One of the things I know the province is doing right now is we're looking at doing a legislative review, and we want to raise the bar. There's a process there that we're going through right now. Graham Knox is he's the director for our program. If you want to learn a little bit more about what the province is doing from our efforts to raise the bar when it comes to spill response. We're not talking just about the marine, we're talking about the province as a whole. Feel free to contact him at any time throughout the next 2 days. So I think I'm going to leave it there, and I'll let Peter talk about his experience.
I don't think my voice ever has a problem carrying, but yeah, so I think this is a really interesting, very unique opportunity to address a crowd such as this. So I know we're here to speak about the incident that morning of October 16th and what was going through our minds. But I think before I get into that whole dialogue, I think it is really important to focus in on who's here and try to provide some context and understanding of where the Haida are coming from. I don't know if a lot of you have intimate knowledge about the Haida Nation and really our politics is probably the best way I could put it. But I think you have to, I'm going to start with that so you can get an understanding of how we act and how we view things. It can only really be understood by understanding where we come from politically. So I think when it comes to our approach of, when it comes to shipping, I mean the subject we're here to talk about is shipping. Shipping for us is a political issue. And it's something that when we politically talk about shipping, the first thing that comes to mind is the federal government. Because when it comes to these subject matters around whatever it might be, there's always a jurisdictional issue that we have to figure out before we dive into it. So shipping in our mind is a federal jurisdictional issue. It's been on that table, which is we've been really having difficulty with historically with Canada. Because I think if you look at our story and where we're coming from, the Haida Nation is intimately involved in a process of reconciliation. And I think that term has been hijacked over the last decade in terms of people applying it to whatever it is they're doing. But for the Haida Nation, it's been applied going back almost over 20 years now, when we actually set up the Guayhanas agreement and protected all of the Guayhanas area. Because what that is it's a co-management agreement between the government of Canada and the government of the Haida Nation. So when we signed the Guayhanas agreement in 1993, the biggest issue that we were battling at that time was around title. Who has title to Haida Gwaii? Who has the responsibility to protect Haida Gwaii? So of course the Haida Nation was fighting very hard for what we believe is this is the Haida Nation's island. We can prove it. We have to go back in our history to show about it, where our roots are and the evidence that we do come from these islands. And in our mind, we never extinguished title to Haida Gwaii. But of course, I don't want to get too far off with the politics, but we never agreed with the approach of the government of Canada to apply treaty. Because of this notion, we're an isolated island, there's only one nation on this island, the Haida Nation, there's no territorial overlap. So the notion of treaty for us is foreign and something we're not interested in discussing. So, because the government of Canada only has that one mandate to negotiate treaties, it's been very difficult for the Haida to address the title question without wanting to walk down that path. But we have been very creative and trailblazing in what we've done. So the Guayhanas agreement was a step in reconciliation, which means let's reconcile our differences. We didn't reach a conclusion on who has title to Haida Gwaii. We actually agreed to park that conversation because we're not gonna come to a conclusion on who has title to the islands. But what we can do is we can focus on similar things that are of interest for each other. So Guayhanas, this beautiful territory that's down south from here, it was agreed upon by Canada and the Haida Nation that it should be protected. So what we did is we parked the title conversation, but we focused in on having mutual respect and want to protect the southern part of Haida Gwaii that's known as Guayhanas. So we have traction on this process of reconciliation. We did it in 1993, and then we took another big step with British Columbia in 2009, where we also took another step in reconciliation, where we now co-manage the land and the foreshore decision-making on Haida Gwaii. So then another big step, where again we're not addressing the title question, but we are agreeing to work together. So both parties continue to act the way they feel is appropriate. So I like the comment earlier was, I think it was Norma that mentioned, we shouldn't have to sit there and ask, to act a certain way. You just have to react the way you feel appropriate. And that's what we do under this reconciliation agreement, is that we act the way the Haida Nation feels we should act. So I think the other big achievement when it comes to this whole conversation is in 2010, we took another big step in reconciliation, where we set out the marine conservation area of Guayhanas and signed that agreement in 2010 to co-manage and talk about marine protection of Guayhanas. So these are all important because when you think about how are we getting prepared to act in this conversation around shipping, we have our preconceived ideas of what we want to do, but we are still trying to reconcile and work out these differences with the government of Canada. As I stand here today, the issue of shipping has still not been brought to the table between the Haida and the government of Canada in a meaningful way. So that's just the way it stood. So I'm going to get back to the actual incident now. Because what this incident meant to the Haida Nation was an eye-opening, very brutal eye-opening experience for us. Is that as we politic, is kind of the term I like to use, because that's what we're trying to do. We're politicking around the issue, and in the meantime, we're not doing anything. We're not making any progress on really getting into the work. We're still kind of fighting over the conversation. So what Simushir meant to us was it allowed us and provided the space for us to finally have this conversation in a safe manner. Because leading up to the Simushir incident, when it came to the issue of shipping, the only tables that were being created for the Haida Nation were under the auspices of oil or LNG. So provincially, there's been a lot of forums that have been hosted by other First Nations around shipping, but it's always under this umbrella of an LNG or an oil conversation. So for us politically at the Haida Nation, we do not have a mandate to walk down those roads and embrace those as inevitable things. We're still in a position where we're opposing those things. So Simushir, the morning of, changed everything. So for us, that we've been referring to it as basically an awakening that we can't wait any longer to address this serious issue of shipping and what it means to the Haida Nation. So the morning of the 16th, coincidentally, we woke up to the last day of our House of Assembly. So for you, the House of Assembly for the Haida Nation is like the legislature or the House of Commons. We meet once a year to make decisions on how the Haida Nation should proceed on all matters that we want to deal with. And also coincidentally, the first resolution that was on our table that morning was in regards to the bill that Nathan Cullen put forward on banning oil tankers off the west coast of British Columbia. So pretty amazing that we woke up that morning getting ready to dive into that debate at our house, which wasn't going to be a debate. It was going to be more of just empowering ourselves to stand up and take that responsibility to protect our island. But we woke up that morning with a phone call. I got a phone call from Robert Davis, who's our fisheries chair in the back, and he called me and said, "Yeah, I got a weird call this morning, and somebody said there's a ship adrift off of Haida Gwaii, and yeah, they just want to let us know about it." So I was like, "Well, that's interesting. Okay, well, I guess we'll keep our eye on that. But let's get focused on the House of Assembly. We have to get ready. We're going to work." And then all of a sudden, then the major calls start coming in. So Roger Gerard gives us a call and really kind of lays the seriousness of the matter. So this is one of those things where, as leaders and as the leadership of the Council of Haida Nation, we're tasked with being ready for these types of things. I'll be very blunt. We weren't ready by any means. So what it caused us to do was to contemplate, what are we going to do? Are we going to go about our business and try to continue our day? Which the people, the Haida Nation, the people that make up the Council of Haida Nation were there, focused on the duty at hand. And then we had this major emergency happening off the side. And so within about a half hour, we had to contemplate whether we're going to drop our whole assembly and then pick up, dealing with this emergency situation. So that's what we did. It wasn't much of a contemplation. I think within 5 minutes, we all realized that, the seriousness of the matter. We have to shut down our business, and we have to set up our own command center, for lack of a better term, because we never even contemplated the idea of a command center. So then we went through the process of saying, well, who should we have around this table? So the place that we go to is our knowledge holders and our technical people. So luckily, we had the House of Assembly convened. We had some of these people in our room. So two of the people that I'd like to acknowledge that played a major role is Roy Jones Jr. and Wilson Brown. They were our local experts, our navigational experts, our marine experts. Luckily, they were in the room, and we were able to go up into old Massive Council chambers and set up our own command center. And that's when we really plugged into everything else that was happening in terms of the communication and everybody getting ready to share everything. So then we were ready, to plug in. So I think when it comes to what happened next, of course, they were laying out the situation that the Simushir had lost power and was adrift west of Galgaya Bay. A major storm was in progress and was expected to continue. So the table was set and we really didn't know what to do. But anyone that knows the West Coast knows that this is a very rugged area with a steep rocky shoreline. The bottom drops off dramatically quickly, and in most areas there's little chance of anchoring a vessel without power before it comes aground. But I think the other thing that should be noted here is that where this vessel was situated in Galgaya Bay is within the Guayhanas National Marine Conservation Area. So we have that process, that cooperative management agreement that we look to say, well, how do we apply this pre-existing management agreement to this exercise? And that's where we realize, that a lot of the work under that agreement has not taken place. The issues around shipping and fish that we want to talk about and why we signed this agreement have not taken place up to this point. So again, we turn to that pre-existing agreement thinking that would be our vehicle to address this appropriately, but it was not. So we ended up concluding, the House of Assembly was adjourned for the day, and we basically told everybody this is the situation that's going on and they're welcome to stay around to keep informed of what's going to happen. And we actually expected that the communities would go home because we're not going to be debating the resolutions, and a lot of people have their own resolutions on the floor and are there to advocate for them. So we were expecting us to go into our room, do our business, and everybody would go home and we would just try to keep everyone informed. But what we've seen everybody stick around, and everybody was on pins and needles, and this sense of hopelessness was in the air. And actually the opposite happened, where it wasn't people going home, but there was more people coming to the hall. Basically getting prepared for this ship to run aground. Simple little things like some of our elders saying, should I make sandwiches? Should we get food prepared? Because it sounds like you guys are going to be here for the long haul. It was really interesting just to see the sense of duty from all levels of all walks of life in Haida Gwaii. Nobody's turned their back to this and walked away from it. They did the opposite. They came into the room and said, what can I do to help? So I think that's really eye-opening about how the Haida Nation and Haida Gwaii feels about our role in this overall. So we started getting tapped into the conversation. We were in regular contact not only with Coast Guard, Parks Canada, the BC Ministries, both Flinro and BC Parks. And keep in mind that we're used to working on a government-to-government level. So acting this way and being in this position is not new to the Haida. And we're really proud and happy with how all the other authorities responded. Because once we got over that rocky, where do we fit in this conversation introduction, it was done appropriately. And I think I want to acknowledge the authorities for that it didn't take much for them to acknowledge our role in the situation as a decision maker. And not as a stakeholder, as the term was being used, but as actually the people that live here in our backyard. We weren't waiting for decisions from Vancouver and Ottawa. We were already getting ready to contemplate what's our role going to be. So our fisheries team, led by Russ and our marine traditional knowledge holders, started compiling a list of local vessels and what was going to be their ability to respond. And the same situation presented itself that we were contemplating with all the other response vessels. Where this was situated could not happen in the worst possible place. Because even response from Haida Gwaii was going to take anywhere from 10 to 12 hours to even reach the West Coast. So we brought, we were feeling a little bit concerned about our ability to respond in a quick manner, but we were getting ready to go. These guys are ready to get their boats. Wilson Brown, for example, was ready, ready to hop, tow his boat in the water and go. So we compiled all of our assets together, and by assets I don't necessarily mean just vessels, but also our traditional knowledge holders, the people that know all these areas inside and out. And we also started tapping into the conversations that we have had leading up to this. And Stafford Reed was somebody that's come in to help the Haida Nation a lot in terms of just getting educated around shipping. Not necessarily in anticipation of growth around oil and LNG, but just today's existing traffic. So we supported this joint decision to set up a forward-leaning incident command center, a command post in Queen Charlotte. in case that there was an oil spill. We knew all along that this was an emergency response. It wasn't the oil spill escalating conversation yet. But we just knew that the post had to be in Haida Gwaii. And the same thing, there was contemplation about Prince Rupert and places like this. But once we fought for the idea of it being in Haida Gwaii, the authorities all agreed and we moved and mobilized. So our team participated in the environmental call on that Friday afternoon at 4, about the time when the Gordon Reed arrived on scene. It was at that point that the Simushir was within a few hours of coming ashore off the west coast. The ship had drifted north, and it was thought that it would come aground on a steep, rocky shoreline between Tassou Sound and Englefield Bay. We had this feeling of impending disaster until we were informed that when the Gordon Reed had orders to pick up the crew from the vessel. That was, I think, at the peak of this when we really believed that this was going to happen. And once that crew was going to be evacuated off the vessel, that's when the hearts were sinking and we were getting ready. We just knew that at that point there would be no possibility of keeping it offshore. But we were obviously greatly relieved to learn that the Gordon Reed had managed, after several attempts, to put a tow line on the ship. But we still understood that we were still in a precarious situation. But I think at the end of the day, we avoided disaster. I think a lot of people breathed a sigh of relief. But I think at the end of the day, we also shifted right into the mindset of, well, where do we go from here? We got caught, we weren't prepared. It is our duty as the Council of Haida Nation, and I think everybody on the islands, to get more prepared in the event that this happens again. So I'm going to briefly go over, some of the issues we think, from a Haida Nation perspective, from the lessons learned from the incident. What are we thinking about now? What are some of the areas that we want to focus on, why we're here, and what we want to focus on the next 2 days. So this is something we'll obviously get into more details with in the workshops, but I'll go over them really quickly because I know I can feel Russ's glaze on me that I'm going over already. But I think obviously for us, prevention is everything. That's the priority, is to try to prevent any of this from even happening. So emergency preparedness is absolutely necessary, but prevention has to come first. We need to acknowledge and give our acknowledgement to the Canadian Coast Guard, who were exemplary given their existing resources. So when we talk about prevention, we're talking about the Coast Guard needing additional assets to improve response times for remote locations such as the west coast of Haida Gwaii. We are very concerned about the reduction in resources to the Coast Guard. We believe that changing that and giving more resources to the Coast Guard to protect the west coast of Haida Gwaii is absolutely mandatory. We also asked ourselves a question when this all happened, is why was this ship so close to Haida Gwaii? It was always our belief that there was these buffer zones or these safety zones that prevented these ships from coming too close. So the Simushir was close to the recommended limit, 25 mile offshore for transiting the west coast. But these distances are inadequate to allow for offshore rescue, which was shown by a 2002 Canada-US study. These distances need to be at least 50 miles from shore and should more likely be 100 miles given the home ports of rescue tugs. On the issue of salvage, we learned that deployment for salvage could take weeks and would need to come from the US salvage capacity, such as the ability for lightering of fuel is essential to reduce potential for environmental impacts. System oversight. And this is our steep learning curve about just understanding the system and how it all works. We need to play a significant leading role in the oversight of shipping. This includes guiding of regional investments in accident prevention. We need to be prepared and be able to act expeditiously in all foreseeable situations. This includes understanding of contingencies to minimize pollution, such as use of dispersants or in situ burning. Emergency response plans focus on oil, but similar levels of preparedness are needed for salvage of vessels and of cargo. Coordinating centers. There is a significant benefit in having local expertise and regional agency staff engaged in response discussions, especially with our knowledge of the area and local conditions. I want to give you an example of just how specific and how accurate our traditional knowledge is is while we had our own command center set up in Old Masson, while information was rolling in, we were sitting there just contemplating who to talk to on all levels. And I remember vividly, both of our marine experts kept on saying the same question to us, which, what are their coordinates? What are their coordinates? What are their coordinates? So we were always asking on the phone the coordinates of where this ship was. And at the time, we didn't necessarily know why they were asking that question, because I'm not a marine expert by any means. But what we watched them using is they were using their traditional knowledge in terms of trying to track where this vessel was going to run adrift and maybe hit ground. So as we were getting those coordinates to them, they were calculating the winds, the prevailing tides, everything that was going on, they were calculating the way they know how. And they were telling us, it's going to go here, it's going to go here, it's going to go here. And amazingly enough, they were one step ahead of the information coming in of exactly where the ship was going. So we went from feeling panicked about really not knowing what was going to happen to our traditional knowledge holders actually predicting, based on their traditional knowledge on the marine areas, and then all the information coming in of where it was going. It was remarkable to know the accuracy. They knew exactly where this thing was going to go. So I think that just really shows that our local knowledge and our knowledge holders are absolutely critical to being at these tables with us. So I guess trying to speed along here, places of refuge was also not a new concept to us. Stafford Reed came in about a year and a half ago and started educating us on the notion of places of refuge. But like I said, because of the political environment we're in around, the only way you're going to talk about this is if you embrace oil and LNG. We haven't been at those tables to embrace that conversation. Since the Simushir, we're now eyes open talking about places of refuge, because we have to get prepared to having that difficult conversation that we haven't wanted to have, which is, where are we going to put this thing? Where's the best place to situate it where it's going to have the least environmental impact, that's going to have the least impact on HIDA, on our traditional use of the areas. So we are now diving into this exercise about where, identifying these predetermined places of refuge so that for future examples, there will be no argument about where they go. And we have to have that hard conversation about, in the event of an emergency, we have to have that discussion and make the decisions on where we believe places of refuge can be designated. So CHN and Transport Canada has met in January, and we followed up with a workshop in Skidegate in March. So places of refuge is an exercise since Simushir we've dove headfirst into and are now embracing, trying to come up with that collective decision making. But back to the traditional knowledge, the information sharing is everything. So CHN has access to numerous data sources acquired through marine planning over the last 8 years. So Russ, Kathy, Chris, all of our marine experts have been working day in, day out, and I would echo the sentiments of Russ and their work ethic. Getting emails on Saturday night and Sunday morning, all hours of the night on, they're focused on this thing. They have a lot of information to share. But there's no safeguards for sharing confidential First Nations information in emergency situations. We also have a traditional knowledge data set that contains confidential information. So this is an example of what we've compiled. This is 8 years of work of a marine plan that the Haida Nation, along with other coastal First Nations, just approved, along with British Columbia just a few weeks ago. So this includes, the sensitive information includes rare or sensitive sites that should be avoided, or may need protection in the case of oil spill. Methods for effectively utilizing this confidential data needs to be addressed through protocols for information sharing. Just a quick comment on the Unified Command. We support a Unified Command approach to decision making in principle involving federal, provincial, and First Nations government. But in practice, a lot more work is needed. Agency staff stated numerous times that local knowledge was needed to make good decisions. The Haida Nation was prepared for Unified Command from previous workshops about shipping issues. Our experience in working with Parks Canada and BC Ministries is that it takes time to develop trust and relationships. It's very difficult to do that in an emergency situation. So we just need to make sure that we build that trust in the relationships starting today, moving forward, so that we're not doing that in that emergency state. So this can be developed through pre-planning and joint training opportunities, which I think is what we try to get started on the day of October 16th. Geographic response plans. During the incident, the command team discussed potential responses if there was an oil spill in McIntyre Bay. The marine plans that were announced 2 weeks ago identified geographic response planning as a joint priority by CHN in the province. The multi-agency debrief identified an action for the federal government to participate in this work. There's a concern that the area response planning process currently underway may delay the collaborative development of more detailed plans for the northern areas of the province. New regional investments, shipping and port developments in northern BC is increasing dramatically. Similar investments are now needed in emergency management and coastal management. Keep in mind that the Haida Nation is obviously the lead political government on these islands, but we don't exclude ourselves from this conversation. In order to protect our islands, we acknowledge that there's got to be investment made by ourselves as well. And I think if you know more about the story of the Haida Nation economically, we are moving into a place where we will be better situated to actually invest in our own assets around protecting Haida Gwaii. So please keep that in mind when you talk to us. That's the level that we're at as a government. This is not about us putting our hand out and asking everybody to do this for us. We play there's responsibilities that come with being on this same level of the governments, and we embrace that responsibility as well. But in saying that, there is the role of the responsible party, and I'm going to conclude on this note. We understand that the principle behind the Canadian system of polluter pays, but this may have hindered the process to deploy a tug and engage the oil spill response organization. So in closing, I want to acknowledge all the hard work and dedication of the federal and provincial staff involved in the search and rescue and emergency response. It is a system that needs improvement, and those of you who are here today know how it can be best improved. This was a near miss. I know terminology that a lot of people are uncomfortable with that term, but we're telling you from the Haida Nation perspective that this was a near miss. We were fortunate that the weather abated. We are fortunate that the Gordon Reed arrived before the ship reached the shore. We were fortunate that this was a relatively small cargo ship that could be handled by the Gordon Reed. But we are forever indebted to the Gordon Reed for their efforts that evening. So this is an opportunity to learn. We're not here to get too political about those matters. Everybody's here for the same purpose, which is what do we do to avoid another major disaster for Haida Gwaii? So we're here to work together and move forward together, and I look forward to having conversations with you all over the next 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I'd like to now introduce Randy Henry. Randy is the Gulf Coast Response Manager for Gallagher Marine Systems. He covers the pollution response for 14 states on the Gulf of Mexico and Mississippi River, and has extensive experience as a first responder in potentially serious marine spills. I got to know Randy very briefly last night, and I can also say he is the one person you'd want to pick to be on an Aleutian island with you if you had no boats coming by for a while. I learned Randy knows about 100 different ways to cook halibut and survive on an island. So welcome, Randy. If you wouldn't mind coming up here and using this microphone, we'd appreciate it.
Hello, everybody. Got a bit of a cold, so just kind of bear with me. As many of the other panel have explained, I got snatched into this while I was at a credit union eating a hot dog, and the call came in that there was a Russian vessel off the coast of British Columbia, and that I had been activated to go, along with 4 other members of our response team. That's when you turn your phone off, because your first priority is to get your clothes and get to wherever it is you need to be going. Ultimately, I got here. There was a Royal Canadian mounted policemen waiting for me at the airport. First time I've ever gotten to ride in the front seat of a police vehicle. So that was kind of neat. And I showed up at the command center, and it was on. My first reaction is, Lord, what have I stepped into here? Because in just the previous few minutes, I had been going through the emails that had occurred while I was on the plane. And I went through those emails again last night, and it's like reliving minute by minute. And buddy, it was close. When they say near miss, I've been on a number of these, and I'd have bet even money, you'd still been scraping rock somewhere. This was potentially about the worst kind of scenario you could get. The weather was not cooperating. You have really rugged terrain, and there were challenges on even trying to get to the scene in any kind of vessel, much less with response equipment. There's a lot of things that go on in the background when one of these things happen. A WCMRC actually called our office to report that one of the vessels we represent, the Simushir, had lost power and wanted to know if we could talk to the owners and get some kind of a response agreement in place. We did. When you're dealing with a lot of these foreign vessel owners, it's hard at best because they're pinching every penny they can get to rally resources if they don't already have agreements in place. They had agreements in place in the lower 48. They did not with Canada because this was not a port of call for them. So it took a lot of hammering and a lot of cajoling. I was representing the responsible party. And we have a duty to the people that were contracted to make every effort to lessen the amount of damage that their vessel could do. And basically that's what I do for a living. We try to get in on top of it just as quickly as possible, get the command center up and running, get it staffed with all the appropriate agency folks and people with expertise to carry on a unified response. When one of these things actually happens, the first 48 hours is pretty much a cluster, okay? Because there is so much information coming in at one time, it's not getting disseminated quickly enough. That's where the situation reports come in. Everybody gets together. In the command group tries to get a situation report out every couple of hours. And that should be disseminated to a press agent or to a agency that can disseminate that information onto the stakeholders all the way down the line, including the First Nations. And I think it was, once it got established, the communication line got established, you know, the booger in the closet is the one that you can't see and you can't hear. When you expose it a little bit to the daylight and you have some good intel, then you can make a good decision on which way to jump. So, I mean, in that respect, it's very important to try to get communications up and going immediately. One of the first things that we do in the U.S. is we have attorneys that we activate immediately, they hold the purse strings. These are the P&I club, Protection and Indemnification clubs. They hold the purse owners for the insurance company. One of their first steps is to establish like an 800 number to where if anybody has a claim, they can call that 800 number and be directed in where they need to be filing the claim. Because there's a lot of questions and a lot of confusions to begin with. The command center really has its own gravity. It has its own set of problems. If you can divert a lot of these questions to somebody that ultimately pays the bill, then that's a good thing. I thought that the way that the Coast Guard handled this thing was, it wouldn't have happened in the lower 48. You'd have had a spill. It'd have been on top of the rock somewhere. These guys had my utmost respect for doing what they did. They pulled the rabbit out of the hat, and they kept pulling until they got the rabbit out of the hat. So, the kudos to them. You guys are very fortunate to have the quality of Coast Guard and provincial and federal folks that you have. They actually are really conscientious, and I'm not really politically correct. I think there's a lot of latitude here for some good things to come from this. I would urge you to continue your dialogues and voice your concerns. The guys from WCMRC were great. And those are the kind of folks you need to corner when the weather abates a little bit. So, like I said again, it was a close call. It was a very close call because 90% of these that I go to, it winds up in spots that it shouldn't be. And I'll take questions later on when it comes time for that, but that's pretty much it for me.